For 15 years, I believed I had built something unbreakable. My name is Ethan, and I'm 34 years old. My wife, Emma, is 33. We met when we were teenagers, fell in love in our early 20s, and built a life that, to the outside world, seemed perfect. 2 kids, a beautiful home, and a marriage that, for all its ups and downs, felt like it was built on something real, something solid. I never questioned my loyalty to her. Not once. Temptation exists in every long-term relationship. Flirtations, fleeting moments where someone new catches your eye. But I never let it cross a line. Monogamy wasn't just a commitment I made. It was part of who I was. Emma was the only woman I ever wanted, the person I thought I could trust beyond all doubt. Looking back, I wonder if I was the only one who felt that way. Our life wasn't always easy. We started with nothing, living in a tiny apartment with secondhand furniture, scraping by on entry-level jobs. But we worked hard, climbed our way up. I built a business with my best friend, Ryan, turning a struggling startup into a company that finally gave us the stability we had always dreamed of. Emma was with me through it all, supporting me, cheering me on. Or at least, that's what I thought. If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you we were happy. Sure, we had our arguments. Who doesn't? I worked long hours, and I know that sometimes made her feel alone. But I always came home to her. I always made time for our family. I never saw the cracks forming beneath the surface. And maybe that was my biggest mistake, believing that love alone was enough to keep everything together. They say trust isn't broken all at once. It fractures slowly, like a hairline crack in glass that spreads with every unnoticed shift, every tiny pressure you ignore until, one day, the whole thing shatters in your hands. Looking back, I wonder if the first crack appeared years ago, so small that I dismissed it as nothing, a meaningless stress point in an otherwise solid foundation. The first time Emma betrayed me, I told myself it was a mistake. A terrible, gut-wrenching, heartbreaking mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. It was with a coworker, someone she saw almost every day, someone who had slipped too easily into the spaces of our life that I thought were reserved for me. It started with suspicious messages, texts that she quickly deleted, hushed phone calls taken just out of earshot, little shifts in her routine that didn't quite make sense. I remember the sick feeling in my gut when I finally confirmed what I already knew deep down. The feeling of looking at undeniable proof, of realizing that the person you trusted most had already made the choice to betray you long before you ever found out. We separated for a while. She swore to me, through tears and apologies, that it was a lapse in judgment, a fleeting, meaningless mistake, one that she regretted more than anything. She told me she couldn't bear the thought of losing me, that she had let stress, loneliness, and a desperate need for validation cloud her judgment. And because I loved her, because I believed in the life we had built, I forgave her. The second time, I wasn't as naive, but I was still hopeful. It wasn't a coworker this time, but an old boyfriend she reconnected with when she visited her hometown. A weekend away, an innocent reunion that turned into something more. I never got the full story. Only broken pieces, half-truths mixed with desperate pleas for another chance. She told me it didn't mean anything, that she had been caught up in the past, in nostalgia, in the reckless stupidity of old familiarity. And once again, against my better judgment, I forgave her. For 4 years, I convinced myself we had moved past it. I told myself that people make mistakes, that love is about second chances, that if we truly worked on our marriage, we could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. I told myself that I wasn't a fool for staying, that what we had was worth fighting for. And for a while, it seemed like things were better. She was more present, more engaged in our life together. The distance between us, the hesitation in her touch, the guarded look in her eyes, it all seemed to fade away. But trust, once broken, never quite fits back together the same way. And 2 months ago, I finally realized that I had been living in denial. It started with the smallest thing, so small that, on any other day, I might have brushed it off without a second thought. A jacket, carelessly tossed in the back seat of her car, draped over our kid's booster seat like an afterthought. At first, I assumed it was mine, or maybe one of the kids, but when I picked it up, the fabric was unfamiliar, heavier than anything I owned, carrying a scent that didn't belong in my home. It wasn't mine. It wasn't our son's. And for a long, frozen moment, I just sat there, staring at it, feeling the kind of dread that creeps in slowly, tightening its grip until you can't breathe. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I waited. I watched. I started noticing the tiny shifts, the way she kept her phone face down, the way she left the room to take calls, the way she smiled at messages I wasn't meant to see. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting old wounds distort my perception of reality, that I had promised myself I wouldn't become the kind of man who saw ghosts in every shadow just because I'd been burned before. But then came the night that changed everything. Emma had mentioned it casually, in passing, a corporate team-building dinner, a mandatory event, nothing exciting. She said she'd be late, not to wait up, that she'd probably get drinks with coworkers afterward. I sat in our living room, flipping through TV channels, trying to ignore the gnawing unease in my gut, telling myself not to spiral. And then, at 9:47 p.m., I made a decision. I grabbed my keys. I told myself I wasn't doing anything crazy. Just checking. Just easing my own mind so I wouldn't lie awake all night with imaginary scenarios running through my head. But when I got to the restaurant she had mentioned, the parking lot was nearly empty. No sign of her car. No sign of a company dinner. I knew in that moment that I had a choice. I could turn around, go home, pretend I hadn't seen what I'd just seen. Or I could do what every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do. I pulled out my phone, hesitated only a second before opening the location-sharing app we had installed years ago, back when we were still the kind of couple who worried about safety and shared everything without hesitation. I tapped her name, watched as the tiny blinking dot settled in an address that made my stomach drop. Ryan's house. My best friend. My business partner. The man who had stood next to me at my wedding, grinning as he handed me the ring I slid onto Emma's finger. The man I had built my career with, trusting him not just with my company, but with my future. For a long, excruciating moment, I just sat there, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I felt like I had been dropped into a movie. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life. Not to me, not to my marriage, not with my best friend. This was the kind of plot you see in trashy late-night dramas, the kind of betrayal that felt too obvious, too ridiculous to actually happen. And yet, here I was. I wanted to march up to that door, bang on it until they were forced to face me, until I could see the lies in their eyes as they scrambled for excuses. I wanted to scream at them, to demand to know how long this had been happening right under my nose. I wanted to grab Emma's bags and throw them onto the street, to tell her that whatever this was, it wasn't happening behind my back anymore. But I couldn't move, because somewhere, beneath the rage, beneath the betrayal, was something worse. Doubt. Maybe it would be easier to not know the details. Maybe it would be easier to go home, pretend I hadn't followed her, pretend that I wasn't standing in a dark parking lot staring at my phone like a man who had just watched his life collapse in real time. Maybe I could just push it all down, swallow the anger, the heartbreak, the humiliation, and focus on the only thing that still mattered, our kids. Was this really worth destroying everything? But then, an even darker thought settled in. Could I even look at her the same way again? Could I sit across from Ryan in the office, shake his hand, make deals with him? Knowing this, the answer was immediate. No, I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. I didn't even know how to process this, let alone what to do next. My hands were shaking, my mind racing in 1,000 directions at once, each thought colliding with another until I felt like I was going to break apart. So, instead, I did the only thing I could do. I drove home. I walked through the front door, sat down on the couch, and stared at nothing for a long time, feeling completely and utterly hollow. And when Emma came home an hour later, smiling as she kissed me on the cheek, telling me she was exhausted from a long dinner, I forced myself to smile back. Because I needed time. Because I needed to think. Because, at least for now, she couldn't know that I knew. At first, I thought I could let it go. I thought maybe, for the sake of my kids, for the sake of keeping some semblance of normalcy, I could bury it deep inside me and pretend I didn't know. Maybe I could convince myself that, as long as they thought they were getting away with it, I could at least control how much it hurt me. But I was wrong. This wasn't just some meaningless mistake. This wasn't a drunken lapse in judgment. This wasn't something I could brush off like an unfortunate but distant betrayal. This was Ryan, my best friend, my business partner, the man I had trusted more than almost anyone else in my life. And now, the two people I trusted most had decided that my pain was an acceptable price for their fun. At first, I couldn't understand it. Why him? Why did she pick him of all people? Was it because she wanted to hurt me? Was it because he was always around, making it easy? Or was it because she knew it would tear me apart more than anything else could? I spent days in a haze, trying to process it, pretending I didn't know, going through the motions of daily life while inside, I felt like I was drowning. I sat across from Ryan in meetings, listening to him talk about projections and contracts like he wasn't stabbing me in the back. I shared a home with Emma, watching her cook dinner, kiss our kids goodnight, and smile at me like she wasn't spending her free time in bed with another man. I was exhausted. But then, one morning, as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I realized something. I didn't want to fight them. I didn't want to yell or throw things or expose them in some dramatic, vengeful act. That would be too easy for them. If I confronted them, they'd feel guilty for a while, maybe shed a few tears, tell me how sorry they were, but eventually they'd move on. And I would be left picking up the pieces while they comforted each other. No, I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I was going to let them destroy themselves. And all I had to do was plant a few seeds and let them do the rest. It started small. I casually mentioned to Emma's sister over coffee that she had been acting a little distant lately, that I was worried she might be going through something. I made sure to sound concerned, not accusatory. Just a husband who was noticing small changes in his wife and wondering if she was okay. A few days later, I did the same thing with Ryan's wife. I told her how much I admired their marriage, how Ryan always spoke so highly of her, but that I had noticed he'd been a little off lately. Maybe work stress? Maybe something else? I made sure to sound completely unaware, just a friend checking in, worried about his business partner. And then I watched as the doubt began to take root. Emma's sister started asking her subtle questions. Was everything okay at home? Was she happy? She played it off at first, but I could see the hesitation, the way it made her nervous. Ryan's wife started calling him more often during the day, asking where he was, checking in unexpectedly. Then, I started acting differently, just enough to make Emma and Ryan uneasy. I became more affectionate with Emma at home, more engaged in our conversations, more interested in her daily life. I could see the discomfort in her eyes, the way she hesitated before answering questions, like she was suddenly aware that I was watching her. With Ryan, I did the opposite. I became slightly distant, distracted during work meetings, more formal in my tone. I didn't make jokes, didn't laugh at his stories, didn't respond to his texts as quickly. Just enough for him to notice. Just enough to make him wonder if something was wrong. And then I waited. Emma and Ryan began to grow paranoid. Emma started overcompensating, being overly sweet, overly interested in my day, trying to gauge whether I suspected anything. Ryan became more restless, more irritable, snapping at small things in the office. And then, the inevitable happened. They started turning on each other. Ryan's wife, growing suspicious, started checking his phone, asking him where he was, questioning why he was suddenly so anxious. The pressure got to him. He and Emma started fighting because now, instead of the excitement of sneaking around, they were weighed down by guilt, by fear, by the suffocating paranoia of not knowing whether I knew. And the best part, I never accused them. Not once. I simply let them tear themselves apart. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't screaming or fighting or exposing the truth in some grand spectacle. It's watching the people who betrayed you destroy each other, and knowing that, for the rest of their lives, they'll never be sure if you were the one who made it happen. It started as a slow, creeping tension, the kind that builds so gradually that neither of them could pinpoint exactly when it began, only that something felt off, like a crack in the foundation of their carefully constructed secret. At first, I could see them trying to ignore it, convincing themselves that nothing had changed, that their world was still as secure as it had been when they first decided to betray me. But that was the beauty of my plan. I didn't have to do anything anymore. The doubt was already inside them, eating away at their confidence, making them second-guess every interaction, every word, every slight shift in behavior. Emma started coming home earlier, as if overcompensating for something, as if trying to re-establish the normalcy she had so carelessly thrown away. She suddenly wanted to cook more meals together, asked about my day more often, touched my arm when she spoke to me, small gestures she had long since stopped doing. Gestures that now felt rehearsed, like she was performing the role of a devoted wife out of obligation rather than genuine affection. And yet, I played along, mirroring her efforts with an easy smile, with casual conversations about work, with subtle reassurances that I suspected nothing at all. I could see the discomfort in her eyes every time I met her gaze just a little too steadily, the way she hesitated before speaking, as if wondering whether I was simply being a loving husband or testing her. Ryan, on the other hand, was unraveling much faster. He had always prided himself on being smooth, on being the kind of man who could talk his way out of anything. But the moment I stopped reacting the way he expected me to, the moment I became distant instead of confrontational, he started to fall apart. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed when I walked into a room, the way he stumbled over his words during meetings, the way he suddenly needed my approval on things he had once been confident about handling on his own. He started drinking more at company events, his laughter just a little too forced, his easygoing charm slipping into something more desperate, more erratic. He didn't know if I knew, and that uncertainty was suffocating him. But the real breaking point came when they turned on each other. It happened sooner than I expected, but that only made it all the more satisfying. One evening, while I sat in my office pretending to work, I overheard Emma on the phone, her voice tight with frustration, her words clipped in a way that told me she was losing control. "Why are you acting like this?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to carry through the thin walls. A pause, followed by a sigh. "No, I haven't said anything. Have you?" I smiled to myself. She was scared. Ryan was scared. They were starting to panic, starting to turn their paranoia inward, starting to wonder if the other had made a mistake, if someone had slipped up, if maybe, just maybe, I had already figured it out and was just waiting for the right moment to strike. From that moment on, the tension between them only grew worse. At work, Ryan avoided me, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy, by too many glances in my direction when he thought I wasn't looking. And Emma? She became restless at home, easily startled, distracted, more irritable than I had seen her in years. The stress of their little secret, once thrilling and intoxicating, had now become a weight neither of them could bear, pressing down on them with every passing day. And I did nothing to stop it. I just watched as they unraveled, as they picked each other apart, as they destroyed themselves without me ever having to lift a finger. Because that was the beauty of true revenge. It wasn't about rage. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about letting them rot in their own guilt until they couldn't stand the sight of each other anymore. And I had all the time in the world to let it happen. The beauty of their downfall was that neither of them saw it coming, not in the way they should have, not in time to stop it. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, one where both drivers had convinced themselves they were in control, right up until the moment of impact. They thought they could handle the pressure, thought they could keep everything contained, thought they were smart enough to get away with it. But secrets are never truly silent. They have a way of making themselves known, of seeping into the spaces between words, of festering until even the people keeping them can't pretend they don't exist. And for Ryan and Emma, that secret was eating them alive. The first real crack, the kind they couldn't ignore, came when Ryan's wife finally confronted him. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but I didn't need to be. The aftermath was loud enough to hear from my office at work, where Ryan spent nearly an hour pacing, swearing under his breath, running his hands through his hair like a man who had just watched his world catch fire. I didn't need to ask what had happened. His wife, whether through instinct or the little clues I had deliberately left behind, had started asking questions. And Ryan, already fraying under the weight of his own paranoia, had no answers that could save him. The next day, he was a wreck. His usual crisp, polished appearance was slipping, his tie loosened, his hair unkempt, the dark circles under his eyes telling me he had barely slept. He barely spoke during meetings, barely looked in my direction, and when he did, his gaze flickered with something I recognized immediately. Fear. He was afraid of me. Afraid of what I might know, of what I might do, of what I might have already done. And that fear, that uncertainty, was poisoning him faster than any revenge I could have planned. But it wasn't just Ryan who was spiraling. Emma was no better. She was slipping at home, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade becoming too wide to hide. She snapped at the kids over small things, forgot simple details, barely touched her food at dinner. And at night, when she thought I was asleep, I could feel her shifting restlessly beside me, as if her own thoughts wouldn't let her rest. And then, it happened. The explosion I had been waiting for. I came home late one evening, later than usual, deliberately unannounced. As I pulled into the driveway, I could hear the shouting before I even stepped inside, Emma's voice, sharp with frustration, Ryan's, lower but no less tense, the words blurred but the tone unmistakable. They were fighting. I stood outside the door for a long moment, just listening, letting the weight of it sink in, letting myself enjoy the moment of knowing that everything was finally coming apart. Then, as if on cue, Ryan's voice broke through, clearer this time, filled with barely controlled rage. This was a mistake, and that was all I needed to hear. I stepped inside, calm, controlled, setting my keys down on the counter like nothing was out of the ordinary. Emma turned sharply at the sound, her face flushed, her breathing uneven, her entire body tense like she had been caught doing something she couldn't explain. Ryan, standing near the door, looked worse, exhausted, furious, his hands clenched into fists at his sides as if holding back words he knew he couldn't take back. For a second, the room was frozen in silence. Then, without another word, Ryan stormed past me, slamming the door behind him so hard the walls shook. I turned to Emma, my expression unreadable, my voice impossibly calm. "Everything okay?" She flinched. Actually flinched, like my voice alone was enough to make her crumble. And for the first time since this had all started, I saw it, the exact moment she realized she had lost. I didn't need to accuse her. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to do anything at all. Because she and Ryan had already done the one thing I had been waiting for all along. They had destroyed themselves. And all I had to do now was watch the pieces fall. You ever have one of those moments where you think you know exactly how you'll feel, how you'll react, and then, when it finally happens, you just don't? That was me, standing in the middle of my own home, watching Ryan walk out the door. Hearing it slam behind him like the final note of a song I never wanted to hear in the first place. And Emma? She was just standing there. I mean, what was she expecting? That I'd yell? That I'd break down? That I'd demand to know why she did it, why she picked him, why she threw away 15 years of our life for something that was never going to last? Because here's the thing. I didn't want the answer. I already knew it wouldn't be good enough. Nothing she could say would make it make sense. Nothing she could say would fix it. So I just walked past her. I didn't look at her. Didn't give her the fight she was probably expecting. I just went upstairs, into our bedroom, well, my bedroom now, I guess, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor like it might have the answer to what the hell I was supposed to do next. And man, that silence? That was the loudest thing in the world. I could hear Emma downstairs, moving around aimlessly, like she had no idea where to go, what to do, how to exist now that she wasn't sneaking around behind my back. It was almost funny. She had spent so much time lying, hiding, running around trying to keep her little secret alive, and now that it was all out in the open, she was the one who felt lost. Not me. I wasn't lost. I was just done. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally stood up, went to the closet, and pulled out a bag. Nothing dramatic, nothing over the top. Just enough to get me through a few days somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I didn't have to hear the floor creak under her feet or catch glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye, pretending like she still belonged here. Because she didn't. Not anymore. And yeah, I could have thrown her out first. Could have made a whole scene about it. Could have told her to pack her bags and get the hell out, made sure she knew exactly how badly she screwed up. But the truth, I didn't care enough to do that. That part of me, the part that needed answers, that needed justice, that wanted to scream and throw things and make her feel as broken as I did, that part was already dead. I walked downstairs, grabbed my keys, and didn't even bother looking at her as I headed for the door. "You're leaving." Her voice was small, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to ask. I didn't stop, didn't turn around, just opened the door, stepped out, and said the only thing that really mattered anymore. "You already did." And then I was gone.